All right, everyone, get ready for a wild ride. We're heading back to ancient Rome, specifically right after the five good emperors.
A pivotal moment in Roman history.
Exactly. We got this fascinating article all about the key events, the figures that led to Rome's eventual decline, gladiatorial excess, political intrigue, the good stuff.
It's a period that offers some pretty stark lessons
Mm.
about power, leadership, those sorts of things. The fragility of empires, even ones as mighty as Rome.
Okay, so we start with Marcus Aurelius, right? The last of those good emperors. Famous for his Stoic philosophy, all about reason, self-control, acceptance of fate. Can you imagine running an empire with that mindset?
It's precisely why his reign is so crucial. To understand what happened next, the era of the five good emperors, it wasn't just, a lucky streak.
Right.
These emperors actively chose capable successors. They focused on efficient governance, sound economic policies.
They had their act together.
They understood that stability, lasting stability, requires more than just military strength. It needs a solid foundation.
Which brings us to
Commodus.
Commodus, Marcus Aurelius' son. And, well, let's just say, the apple didn't fall far from the tree. Or, I guess it did fall really far from the tree. Commodus, he was obsessed with gladiatorial games. And not just watching, he actually participated.
Think of it this way. Rome went from a leader who wrote meditations
A deep dive into Stoic philosophy and self-discipline.
to a ruler who would rather hear the roar of the Colosseum crowd than, contemplate governing. And this wasn't just a personality quirk. It was a real shift in values, a move away from everything that had made Rome strong.
Talk about a PR nightmare, right?
Absolutely.
And the article goes into detail about how this party emperor lifestyle, it had some pretty devastating consequences, like Commodus's lavish spending. On the games, on his own image, it drained the treasury, and all while he was neglecting, essential parts of running an empire.
And that neglect, it really had this ripple effect. Corruption became rampant, experienced officials sidelined,
Yeah.
and the entire administrative machine of Rome, it just started to fall apart.
It's like a cautionary tale, how a leader's priorities, they can really impact an entire system.
Exactly.
And then you throw a bubonic plague outbreak into the mix.
Oh, right, during Commodus's rule.
And his policies, they actually made it worse.
The food hoarding issue.
Yeah.
In times of crisis, you need level-headed leadership, efficient resource management. But Commodus's policies, self-interest, short-sightedness, they just made things worse for everyone. It wasn't just a personal failing, this was a failure of leadership with some pretty dire consequences for the empire.
So we've got an emperor who cares more about being a gladiator than actually ruling. What happens next?
Well, ignoring the needs of your people, alienating those in power.
Not a great strategy.
It rarely ends well. Commodus was assassinated in 192 AD.
Assassinated. Wow, okay, things just took a dark turn.
A major turning point for Rome. It plunged the empire into a period known as the Year of the Five Emperors. Imagine the chaos. 5 different people claiming the throne, all vying for power, with different legions backing each contender. It was a free-for-all. Weakened the empire even further.
It's like a power vacuum just imploded, so who crawls out of this mess?
Well, a North African general named Septimius Severus, he managed to seize control. He was shrewd, ruthless, understood that in times of turmoil, you need military strength above all else. And he consolidated his power, but of course there was a cost.
Yeah, the article kind of hinted at the fact that he wasn't a big fan of the Roman Senate.
Let's put it this way. Severus saw the Senate as a rival, a potential threat. So he boosted the pay and privileges of the legions, secured their loyalty, and simultaneously, he sidelined the Senate, even executed a good number of them.
He wasn't messing around, so he built up the military, but weakened the traditional political structures. Not exactly a long-term solution.
It's a classic dilemma, isn't it?
Yeah.
Balancing military power with civilian authority. Severus definitely prioritized the military, and yeah, it brought stability, but it also set a pretty dangerous precedent that would have lasting consequences for the empire.
And then to top it all off, Severus dies in Britain.
Far from Rome. His death in 211 AD, he was campaigning in what's now Scotland, and, well, it was more than just a personal tragedy. It symbolized this shifting center of power within the empire. Even the emperor wasn't safe. And dying out on the fringes, so far from Rome, it left a void, one that was pretty hard to fill.
And those campaigns in Britain, weren't they, about Hadrian's Wall?
They were.
Yeah.
Those campaigns really highlight the challenges Severus faced. Hadrian's Wall, built over a century earlier, it marked the northern limit of Roman Britain. Severus pushed beyond the wall. It was a display of Roman might. But it also, it stretched resources thin. It emphasized just how difficult it was to maintain such a vast empire.
Okay, so we have a new power vacuum, a disgruntled Senate,
Mm.
and a military that's becoming more and more influential. What happens next in this Roman drama?
Well, Severus had two sons, Caracalla and Geta, and he hoped they would rule together. But, as often happens with siblings, things got a little complicated.
Oh boy, here we go. Family drama, Roman style.
Caracalla, driven by ambition, maybe a bit of paranoia too, he had Geta assassinated,
Yikes.
and he secured sole control of the empire.
So, how did he turn out as an emperor? Was he like his father, all about the military?
Caracalla was definitely known for his ruthlessness, maybe even more so than his father. He continued those military policies, but he also had to deal with some growing external threats. The Germanic tribes, they were really pressing on Rome's northern borders, and in the east, you had the rise of the Sassanid Empire,
Wait, the Sassanid Empire, remind me, who were they again?
a powerful Persian dynasty. They emerged in the 3rd century AD, a force to be reckoned with. They challenged Roman dominance in the east. Think of them as Rome's new archrivals.
Okay, got it. So Rome is being squeezed from all sides. Plus, the economic turmoil, it's all starting to sound like a recipe for disaster.
It really was. The Severan Dynasty, even with some strong rulers, they presided over a period of escalating instability. Rome was being pushed to its limits, internally, externally. It's almost like the foundations of the empire were starting to crack under all the pressure.
And those cracks, they lead us to the crisis of the 3rd century, right? The
Yeah.
article pinpoints 235 AD as the start of this whole mess, when Alexander Severus, the last of the Severan emperors, gets assassinated.
Exactly. Alexander Severus's assassination, it was like a spark that ignited a powder keg. All those tensions, the economic problems, the military ambitions, the political rivalries, everything just exploded. It was a full-blown crisis that would shake the Roman world to its core.
It's amazing how quickly Rome went from the stable period under those 5 good emperors to the brink of collapse in just over 50 years. It makes you realize that even the mightiest empires can be vulnerable.
And it wasn't just a series of random unfortunate events, It was a chain reaction, one thing leading to another. Every decision, every crisis, every power struggle, it all contributed to the empire's decline.
Wow. From Stoic philosophers to gladiatorial excess to political assassinations. And now, new threats on the horizon. What a wild ride. This crisis of the 3rd century sounds intense. I can't wait to see what happens next. But maybe we should let our listener catch their breath for a minute.
Agreed. We've covered a lot of ground, but there's much more to explore. We'll be back to delve deeper into the chaos and examine how Rome tried to navigate this turbulent period. Back again for more Roman Empire action, diving right back into that crisis of the 3rd century.
It was a total mess, right? Emperors dropping left and right, the military calling all the shots, a struggling economy. Didn't look good for Rome.
The immense turmoil, yeah, a real test. Imagine emperors changing so fast it was hard to keep track. The article doesn't go into each one, but, it paints a picture of just how unstable things were. Generals, senators, even rich folks from the provinces, all wanting that top spot, with legions backing different guys.
Like a Roman Game of Thrones or something. Everyone wants that Iron Throne, or I guess in this case, the Emperor's purple robes.
Exactly. And just like in Game of Thrones, all that fighting for power, it had consequences.
Yeah.
The legions, they basically became kingmakers. Their loyalty, that's what got you on the throne. And that just made things worse. More division, less power for the empire itself.
Chaos at the top. But what about out on the edges of the empire? Those external threats, were they heating up?
Oh, yeah. The Germanic tribes, they saw weakness. They ramped up their raids across the Rhine, the Danube. Meanwhile, in the east, the Sassanid Empire, they were expanding, putting pressure on Rome's eastern provinces.
Attacked on all sides. How did they even handle it?
It was rough. A depleted treasury, leaders fighting each other, enemies everywhere. And the constant fighting, it wasn't just losing battles, it was draining resources, disrupting trade. The economy took a hit. The article mentions, they debased the currency.
Right.
They put less silver in the coins, led to inflation.
So things were getting more expensive.
Exactly. A classic sign of trouble. And it wasn't just that. Shortage of men for the army, food shortages. Life just got harder for the average Roman.
Sounds like it was all falling apart. Did anyone try to fix things, or was it just going downhill from there?
There were some attempts at reform, Some worked better than others. A few emperors, like Aurelian, managed to get things somewhat stable. Strong military leadership, some administrative changes.
Aurelian. He's the one who built those walls around Rome, right?
Yes, the Aurelian walls shows what his reign was like. They had to protect the city from those barbarian raids. Rome wasn't expanding anymore, it's survival mode. Aurelian also managed to pull the empire back together. After it had, well, fragmented. That's no small feat.
Fragmented, it actually split up.
Not officially. But during the crisis of the 3rd century, a few regions, they broke away, declared independence. You had the Gallic Empire in the west, Gaul, Britannia, Hispania, and in the east, you had the Palmyrene Empire. Around the city of Palmyra in Syria, those breakaway empires, they were a symptom. Showed how weak the central authority had gotten.
Wow. So Aurelian brought them back in line.
Yeah.
Impressive.
Shows you how good he was at military stuff and politics. But even he couldn't solve all of Rome's problems. The empire was just too big. Too many different people. Too reliant on the army. It was hard to keep it all together.
So how did Rome get out of this crisis? Did some strong leader finally show up, or what?
It wasn't just one thing or one person. It was more gradual. A transition to a new era. Things changed in how the Roman Empire worked. One key figure, though, was Diocletian. He became emperor in 284 AD.
Diocletian, he's the one who, split the empire in two.
Yeah, he did. Diocletian realized that the empire was just too much for one person to handle, so he divided it. Western Roman Empire, Eastern Roman Empire, each with its own emperor. He also started this system called a tetrarchy. 4 rulers shared power. 2 senior Augustes. 2 junior Caesars.
4 rulers. Complicated. What was the thinking there? Just sharing power, or was there more to it?
It was bold. Trying to get at the root of the crisis. Diocletian thought, okay, divide the empire. Easier to manage, militarily, administratively. And the tetrarchy, with senior and junior emperors, that was supposed to make succession smoother. Avoid those power struggles that caused so much trouble.
Like hitting the reset button on the whole empire. Did it work? Did the tetrarchy actually bring stability?
To some degree it did. Diocletian's reforms, they gave Rome some much-needed breathing room. Things got more stable, recovery started, the empire was reorganized, the army, it got stronger, more professional, the economy still had its problems, but it stabilized somewhat. But these changes, they didn't come for free.
What do you mean? What was the downside?
Well, Diocletian's reforms, they were effective, but they were also pretty authoritarian. More power to the central government, strict controls on the economy. He even persecuted certain religious groups, Christians, for example. He saw them as a threat to Roman unity.
Stability through control. A trade-off, I guess.
Exactly. Diocletian's reign, it was a turning point. The empire survived the crisis of the 3rd century. But it was a different empire now. The old system, the balance between emperor, senate, and army, it was gone. Replaced by something more centralized, more bureaucratic, and, often more oppressive.
Wow. All that chaos really changed the Roman Empire. It's like it had to break down completely before it could rebuild itself.
That's a good way to think about it. The crisis of the 3rd century, it was a crucible. It put a lot of pressure on the Roman world, reshaped it. Diocletian's reforms, yeah, they restored order, but they also led to a new kind of empire, one that was more rigid, more controlling, and maybe, in the end, more vulnerable to the challenges that were coming.
All right, welcome back to our deep dive. We've covered a lot of ground already, from the 5 good emperors all the way through that crazy crisis of the 3rd century. And now, well, it seems like Rome's at a crossroads.
It is, yeah. We saw how Diocletian, he was dealing with a real mess, so he made some big changes. Divided the empire, set up that tetrarchy thing, centralized power. But did it work? Did his reboot actually give Rome some long-term stability?
That's the big question, right? He brought some order, yeah, but it came with a price. More control, more taxes, less freedom for the people. Did he really fix the problems?
His reforms bought some time, that's for sure. The tetrarchy, with its 4 rulers, that helped stop those power struggles. For a while, anyway. And splitting the empire, east and west, that made it easier to manage. And that stronger central government, yeah, that definitely brought back some order. But, there's always a but in history.
Always a catch. So what was it this time?
Think of it like this. Those reforms, they were like a bandage on a deep wound. They fixed the immediate problem, but not the real cause. That bigger, more professional army that Diocletian created was expensive.
Ah, right. More soldiers, more money. Food, equipment, it all adds up. And we talked about those higher taxes, too. Not exactly a recipe for popularity.
Exactly. People weren't happy about those taxes. And those rigid economic controls, they were supposed to stabilize things, but they ended up holding back innovation, economic growth, unintended consequences.
And the tetrarchy, those 4 rulers sharing power, did that work out okay? Power can be pretty tempting.
It can be. And even the best plans can go wrong when you throw human ambition into the mix. After Diocletian stepped down, the whole tetrarchy thing fell apart. Rivalries, civil wars, the whole mess started up again. And by 324 AD, there was a new emperor on the scene, Constantine the Great.
Constantine. Now there's a name everyone knows. He's the one who moved the Roman capital, right? To Constantinople. Why do you do that?
That move was huge. Shifting the capital east to Byzantium, which he renamed Constantinople, it showed that the empire's focus was changing. The eastern provinces were becoming more important economically, strategically. Constantine saw that. It wasn't just about moving his throne, he was reshaping the whole empire.
Constantine putting his own stamp on things. A new direction for Rome. Did it work? Did things finally stabilize?
It was a time of big changes, that's for sure. Constantine, he was a smart politician, a great military leader. He unified the empire again, made some important reforms, and yeah, he shifted the center of power, like you said.
And he also embraced Christianity, right?
He did. Constantine's conversion to Christianity and then making it the official religion of the empire, that was a turning point. Not just for religion, but for the whole Roman world, politically, socially.
Wow, a lot going on. But did any of it solve the deep problems that Rome had been struggling with for so long?
That's the question, isn't it? Constantine brought stability. For a time, he made changes. But those underlying pressures, the economy, social divisions, the military threats, they didn't just go away. And that split between East and West that Diocletian started, it kept getting wider.
So even with all the reforms, all the shifting power, the empire was still fragile.
Yeah, in many ways. The crisis of the 3rd century, it showed the limits of the old Roman system. Diocletian and Constantine kept the empire going, but their actions also led to the eventual division and the fall of the Western Roman Empire in 476 AD.
The fall of the Western Roman Empire, the end of an era. But the Eastern Roman Empire, the Byzantine Empire, that lasted for centuries, right? So it wasn't really the end, more like a transformation.
That's it. Rome didn't just disappear in 476 AD, it lived on in the East. The Byzantines, they carried on Roman culture and tradition for another 1,000 years.
It's incredible how much happened in the centuries after the 5 good emperors. Gladiatorial games, plague, civil wars, restructuring the whole empire. It's like a history book in a deep dive.
And what's so interesting about this period is that it shows us that even the strongest empires can decline. Rome teaches us some valuable lessons about governing big, complex societies, the importance of strong institutions, and the need to adapt to change.
It reminds us that history is more than just dates and names. It's about decisions and consequences, and those things still affect us today.
Exactly. And maybe the biggest takeaway from our exploration of Rome is this: decline isn't inevitable. The Romans faced huge challenges, but they were also resilient. They were ingenious. They changed their government, adapted to threats, even embraced a new religion. And they left behind a legacy that still inspires us today.
That's a great point to end on. We've covered so much Roman history in this deep dive, but the story doesn't end here. It's up to all of us to keep exploring, keep asking questions, keep learning about the past.
Who knows, maybe what we learn from history can help us deal with the challenges we face today. After all, history often repeats itself, or at least it rhymes.
And to our listeners, we say this: the Roman Empire may be gone, but it left its mark on the world. Keep exploring, keep learning, and keep diving deep into history. We'll see you next time.